I found out on Tuesday. Tuesdays were supposed to be our nights dinner, laughter, the illusion of love. While I was setting the table, he was setting the stage for his betrayal, whispering promises to her, telling her that our home was theirs, that I was nothing more than an afterthought. He thought I was blind, he thought he was careful. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. An unlocked phone, a careless email, a receipt from a place he should have never been. Little breadcrumbs of deception leading straight to the truth. He was playing a game he just didn't know I had already won. By the time he was ready to walk away, convinced he had outmaneuvered me, I had already laid my trap. And when the final piece fell into place, he didn't just lose me, he lost everything. I wasn't always the kind of woman who saw deception coming. I believed in love, in commitment, in the kind of bond that withstands time and trials. When I married Daniel, I thought I had found that. He was charming, successful, and had a way of making me feel like the center of his world. We built a life together, one that looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful house, dinner parties with friends, late night talks about dreams and the future. But perfection is fragile. It doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks first, small and unnoticeable. The first crack appeared on a quiet Sunday morning. Daniel had been distant for weeks, more absorbed in his phone, quicker to leave for work, less interested in our conversations. I brushed it off. Stress, I told myself. Maybe a rough project at the firm. When I asked if something was wrong, he kissed my forehead and said, "Just work, love, nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Then there were the late nights, the unexpected business trips, the way he'd set his phone face down, silencing notifications. I started to notice the scent of perfume I didn't wear, the way his shirt smelled freshly showered after he claimed he worked late. My mind waged war against my heart. Was I imagining things? Was I just being paranoid? Then came the receipt. It was small, crumpled, tucked into the pocket of his jacket. A dinner for two at a restaurant 2 hours away, a place we had never been together. The date? Last Friday, when he had told me he was in a meeting all night. My heart pounded as I stared at the printed slip of paper, my fingers tightening around it. That was the moment I knew. But I didn't confront him, not yet. If he was lying to me, he was already prepared with more lies. Instead, I did what I had to do. I watched, I listened, I waited. If he thought he was playing a game, he didn't know that I had just become a player too. Then came the emails, the ones he didn't realize synced to our shared home computer. They weren't long, just enough to make my stomach turn. Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again. Our home will be ours soon, I promise. Our home! The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. He wasn't just cheating, he was planning something, something that involved her. I copied the emails, screenshotted messages. I started keeping a journal. Times he left, excuses he gave, discrepancies in his stories. Every piece of evidence stacked like bricks, building a case against the man I had once trusted. I wasn't just preparing to confront him. I was preparing for the moment when he thought he had won, so I could make sure he lost. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. One night, when I was supposed to be out with friends, I returned home early. His car was in the driveway. The lights were dim inside, a soft glow coming from our bedroom. My bedroom. I stood in the shadows, my hands trembling as I listened. Soft laughter, a woman's voice, his voice, low and comforting. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. He had brought her here, into our home, into our bed. I wanted to storm inside, to scream, to let my rage explode in the way it begged to. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I backed away. my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than ever. This wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal on a level I had never imagined. He thought he had everything under control. He had no idea that I was always one step ahead. I wasn't just going to confront him, I was going to destroy him. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. I kissed him goodbye, watched him leave, and then I got to work. Every single step had to be meticulous, calculated, and flawless. First, I visited the bank. I had been added to Daniel's business accounts years ago for emergency purposes, a fact he seemed to have forgotten. With a few swift transactions, I transferred a large portion of our funds into a separate account under my name. He wanted to make our home theirs. Let's see how he fared without our savings. Next, I met with a lawyer. I wanted to know my options, how to ensure that when everything collapsed, I walked away with everything while he was left with nothing. The more I explained my situation, the more my lawyer nodded in understanding. We can make this work, she assured me. Then I went to a private investigator. If Daniel was making plans, I needed to know exactly what they were. I handed over the emails, the receipts, the times and places he disappeared to. Within days, the investigator returned with something even I hadn't anticipated. Daniel hadn't just been planning a future with his mistress, he had been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund his secret life. Worse, he had been moving assets under her name. He was preparing to leave me with nothing. The fury that burned inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt. But instead of lashing out, I smiled, because now I had everything I needed to ruin him. The night I set my plan into motion, I sent Daniel a message. We need to talk. It's important. He came home late, smelling like her. He barely looked at me as he tossed his keys onto the counter. What's so important? I placed a folder on the table. Sit. He smirked, arrogant, confident. He had no idea what was coming. When he flipped open the folder and saw the bank statements, the private investigator's report, the copies of every email and message, his smirk disappeared. His face turned pale. What is this? He asked, voice tight. This, I said calmly, is the end of your game. His hands trembled as he turned page after page, his world crumbling with every piece of evidence. He had spent months thinking he was in control, planning his escape, but the truth was he had been trapped. From the moment I found that first receipt, I stood and grabbed my purse. By the way, I added, pausing at the door, you should check your bank accounts. The last thing I heard as I walked away was the sound of him frantically typing into his phone, only to realize that I had already beaten him at his own game. He thought he had everything under control. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. Daniel wasn't the type to go down quietly. I had expected anger, maybe a pathetic attempt at an apology, but what I didn't anticipate was his desperation. After I left the house that night, I stayed in a hotel, my phone buzzing nonstop with calls and messages. Daniel had finally realized the walls were closing in. Daniel, we need to talk. Please. I can explain. Daniel, don't do this. You don't understand what's happening. Daniel, you've made a mistake. Let's fix this. Fix it? I stared at my screen, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. There was nothing left to fix. He had made sure of that the moment he brought her into our home, the moment he promised our life to someone else while plotting to leave me with nothing. By morning, the storm had only just begun. Daniel's company had received the evidence. The executives who had once praised his brilliance now saw him for what he was, a liar, a fraud. He wasn't just at risk of losing his job, he was at risk of being investigated. His family, his precious family, whom he had always sought approval from, now knew the truth. His mother called me, her voice tight with disappointment. I had no idea. she whispered. I'm so sorry. And our friends? The people who had dined at our table, laughed with us, celebrated anniversaries and holidays? They saw the messages, the receipts, the proof of his betrayal. One by one, they withdrew their support, disgusted by what he had done. Daniel's world was crumbling, but he wasn't done yet. I was walking out of my lawyer's office, the divorce papers in hand, when I saw him. He was waiting by my car. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. This wasn't the composed, confident man I had married. This was someone unraveling. Rebecca, he said, stepping closer. We need to talk. I didn't flinch. There's nothing left to say. His jaw tightened. You didn't have to do this. You ruined everything. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I ruined everything? You lied to me. You betrayed me. And you were going to leave me with nothing. You don't get to play the victim. His eyes darkened. You don't understand. No, I cut him off. You don't understand. You thought you were always one step ahead. That I was weak. That I'd just cry and accept whatever scraps you threw my way. I took a step forward, my voice ice cold. You were wrong. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Fear. Daniel had spent months, maybe years, believing he was in control. That I would never fight back. That I would never win. But I had, and he knew it. Still, he had one last trick up his sleeve. His lips curled into a smirk, the last shred of arrogance he could muster. This isn't over, he said. You'll regret this. I smiled. No, Daniel, you will. Then I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving him standing there, alone, in the wreckage of his own making. The days after our final confrontation felt surreal. For so long, I had lived under the weight of Daniel's deception, suffocating in the lies he spun around me. But now, with each passing hour, the weight lifted. The divorce was swift and ruthless, just as I intended. With the evidence stacked against him, Daniel had no leverage. My lawyer ensured that I walked away with the house, the savings, and the assets he had so carefully tried to hide. As for him, the company cut ties after an internal audit revealed discrepancies. His reputation, once polished and enviable, lay in ruins. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. But victory is a strange thing. It doesn't always come with the satisfaction you expect. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The laughter we once shared, the whispered promises, the version of Daniel I had loved, the man I had trusted with my life. Had it all been a lie from the start, or had he simply become someone else along the way? Closure is a myth, I realized. Some wounds don't heal completely. They just become a part of you. One afternoon, weeks after everything settled, I returned to the house. My house. I walked through the empty rooms, letting the silence fill the spaces where his voice used to be. The ghosts of our past lingered in the walls, but they no longer haunted me. Instead, they reminded me of who I had been and who I had become. Stronger, wiser, free. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, I found Daniel standing there. He looked different. The arrogance, the confidence, it was gone. His expensive suit had been replaced with something simpler. His eyes, once filled with manipulation, held something I had never seen before. Regret. I lost everything, he admitted, voice hoarse. I nodded. Yes, you did. He hesitated. Do you ever think maybe we could have fixed this? I tilted my head, studying him. The answer came easier than I expected. No. There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness, just truth. Daniel exhaled, nodding slowly. I don't know who I am without all of it. And that was the difference between us. I had lost everything too: my trust, my marriage, the future I thought I had. But I found myself in the wreckage. Daniel, on the other hand, had built his entire existence on lies, and without them, he was nothing. I stepped back, resting a hand on the door. Goodbye, Daniel. For the first time, he didn't fight it. He just turned and walked away. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. I didn't feel broken anymore. I had spent so much time thinking I had to fight to get my life back. But standing there, in the home that was finally mine again, I understood the truth. I wasn't getting my old life back. I was building something new, and this time, I was the only one in control. I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. No more secrets, no more battles. I had won, but not as I expected. Revenge didn't fill the void, reclaiming my freedom did. A breeze carried the scent of rain, signaling new beginnings. I raised my glass to the past and the woman I'd become. I was no longer broken. I was free,